Hi, I'm Rob McDonald, and today we're going to do part 2 of the knife videos, and today I'm going to talk about how to keep your knives sharp. Now, whenever I'm in the woods with people or at a gathering and someone asks to borrow my knife, they use it and I always get a comment, "Oh wow, your knife's really sharp." So today I want to share with you the tips that I use to keep my knives sharp enough that people who use knives all the time are even commenting on how sharp they are. So first thing I want to do is I want to talk about what I use. Now I have a couple different sharpeners here. I've got my Oregon Stone, 20 bucks at House of Knives years ago, probably more expensive now, and it's really heavy. So this is what I keep at home because I don't want to carry this around with me. But it's really good. It's got two sides to it. I don't know if you can see the dark and light. And it's got the medium grit here, and then it's got a super fine grit here. And medium grit's where you do most of your work, and super fine's where you just polish it off. In here I have one I made myself, and it's the same kind of thing. It's a medium grit and a really fine grit here. But what these are is they're both just sandpaper. And I use two-sided tape to tape it onto this wood piece here. It's actually was used for flooring. So, and it's much lighter weight, so I can put this in my backpack and take this with me if I'm going on an extended trip, so I can sharpen my knife. And this is probably at least just as good as the Oregon Stone. I like them both. When I'm home in the kitchen I use this, and when I'm out in the woods I use this. So with the sandpaper, I mean, most sandpaper you see is going to have like really big rocky chunks. So I don't know what the number of grit is for the kinds you want, but this, the medium grit, the more coarse side, you should be just able to feel it, just barely, and you should be able to see sparkles in it. But the really fine one, it should actually feel smooth. It doesn't even really feel like sandpaper. It's like, this is when you just polish it off. So as far as how I actually sharpen the knife, the first thing I want to do is I want to wet my stone. Or sandpaper, whichever it is you're using. And I just take my fingers, throw some water on like that, or under a tap. And the reason you want it wet as opposed to dry is because when you're sharpening your knife, it's creating friction, and the friction is going to create heat, and that heat at the molecular level is going to melt the blade of your knife, and you're not going to get as good of a blade out of it. The other thing it's going to do is when it's dry, it's more gritty, so it'll actually take molecular sized chunks out of your knife, which will leave it not as good of a blade. So I like to wet my stone, and I use water. Some people use oil. I like water because it's easier to wash out, along with all the gritty stuff that you get off from your knife. If you use oil, it tends to soak into the stone, and it's much harder to wash out, and it really shortens the life of your stone. So water is the way I go. And as you can see, I've got my hunting knife, my standard knife that I showed you last week. And I've got a kitchen knife. So this doesn't apply just for your hunting knives or outdoorsy knives. You can use a kitchen knife for this just as well. And most of my sharpening actually is the kitchen knives. And when you're sharpening your knife, you want to find that sweet spot where you're just flush with this edge of the blade, not like this, because then you won't even get the blade on the stone, but flush like this, and you want to go into the blade. And you want to be careful that you're not like coming right towards yourself. I mean, you can cut your thumb. So I'm away from myself, and I'm drawing it away from my hand to the left here. I mean, if you're right-handed, it'll go the other way. So just, you know, knife safety is always paramount, even when you're just sharpening your knife, maybe especially when you're sharpening your knife. So just like that, back and forth. And, you know, there's no set time that I do this. I find this meditative, so I'll usually sharpen my knife when I'm doing something else, like, you know, watching a game on TV or something like that. And I'll just sharpen my knives. And you're not going to wear through your entire knife, so more is better than less. If you're new to this, and like, cause I kind of just get a feel. I'm like, okay, the feel's done, but that's after a lot of years of doing this. I've been doing this for 15 years, and if you're new to it, I would say minimum 5 minutes on this. Not even 5 minutes. Maybe like 3 or 4 minutes on this side. And then when you get to the really fine grit, just give that like, I don't know, maybe a minute. You don't need that much. I mean, this is just polishing off. So you saw I'm flush with this. You don't want to go right into the stone. You want it flush, so it's like a smooth. Because if you go right in, it's going to dig into the stone, and that's going to not be good for your blade at all. That's going to be worse than not sharpening it. And then the reason you don't go all just one way, like I could do that, or I could do that. But what happens is if you're going all one direction a bunch of times in a row, it's going to create a burr on your edge. And if you do it enough, you'll be able to feel it. You can feel it right there. So by doing this, it's going to push the metal all up onto this side of the edge of the blade. So by going back and forth, you're preventing that from happening. Now, not all blades are going to be like this. This one's really easy because it's got a very distinct little edge there that you can go along. But if you look at the kitchen knife here very closely, so it's got the distinct edge like that right there, but it's also got another little edge right here, and that's where the money is. That's where you're actually going to want to sharpen. So what I'm going to do with the kitchen knife is I gotta go right on that tiny edge there. Feel that spot. And you know, when you're not used to it, it takes some practice. And you might not have super sharp knives right away. But you keep doing it, and you get the feel for it. And then you get really nice sharp knives. And make sure you put the pressure on for the entirety of the blade. If you're doing a bigger blade, like this kitchen knife, or like the Rambo knife I was showing you last week, you know, sometimes you can have the pressure right there and you kind of like get lazy with the rest of the stroke, but then what happens is you only have a sharp blade from here to here. So put that pressure on for the entire length of the blade so that you're sharpening the entire knife. There we go, and when you're done you should have some really sharp knives for the kitchen, cutting vegetables, or for out in the woods, carving wood, or doing whatever you're doing. Hope this has been helpful, and once again, I'm Rob McDonald, and if you're not watching this on Live Wild, go to the website, livewildschool.com, and check out all the features I have there. Leave a comment, tell me whether you like this, dislike this. Let me know if you've got a better way of sharpening knives that works for you, or let me know if this has worked for you. And we'll see you next week.